still come.
Every great storyteller has a distinct voice, a particularly unique way to them to express their story or their art. In fact, part of the art of communication or the art of art is learning and developing your own style. Serious connoisseurs of art can tell based on the brush strokes or the style which artist contributed that painting to the world. Or serious critics would be able to tell you based on color grading or framing or the motifs in a movie which director led the project for a movie. In fact, I think many of us today can be considered literary connoisseurs. Most of us can fairly quickly identify writing style by the author. I looked up a list of the 20 most culture-shaping storytellers of the last century. And with the wonder of artificial intelligence, I got one of those writing styles to write a summary of the story we're looking at today. And I typed in this prompt: hello, how are you doing today? It's a nice weekend to gather as a community and learn about a gory story of Deborah, Barak, Jael, and Sisera. And then I said, write it in this famous author's style. I was gonna give you a multiple choice list and guess which author's voice this story is in, but Pastor Rozzy said it was too easy. So I'm gonna read in a moment the summary of the story we're looking at today in a world-changing, culture-shaping author's voice, summarizing the story we're looking at today. A hint, according to this list of authors, it's the number 6 culture-shaping storyteller. Here it is. Hello, how are you? Are you feeling okay? It's a fine little weekend, hip hip hooray. With Deborah wise and with Barak kind of brave, with Jael who struck and Sisera's grave. It's thrilling, it's chilling, it's bold, but it's gory. A swirl of suspense in this ancient, true story. Anyone have a guess? Whose voice? I heard it, yeah, Dr. Seuss. His voice is recognizable. There's a pattern to his writing. And it's the same thing with the book of Judges. There is a pattern to the book. There is a cycle to the book. There's repetition in the stories that we're looking at that the author presents to us to help us recognize what's going on and some of the themes. Today's story is indeed thrilling and chilling. It's bold and it's gory, but there's a whole lot for us to learn from this ancient and true story. So will you turn with me in your Bibles to Judges chapter 4. It opens like this. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. Judges chapter 4, it jumps right into the deep end of a very strong warning. And the opening few words should really challenge us and maybe even chill us. We read at the start of Judges 4, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Again and again. One scholar famously described the whole book of Judges as the slow Canaanization of Israel, where the people of Israel started to live more and more like their neighbors. And at the very end of Judges, like the sermon bumper video said, the culture is described as one where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Do you see the comparison? The beginning of Judges chapter 4, they were doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. At the end of Judges, it summarizes the whole thing as everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that comparison should provoke us, and it should challenge us. Are we living what's right by our own eyes? Are we living and doing what's evil in the eyes of the Lord? Or are we living in a way that is right in the eyes of the Lord? Now, that's not really language we use very often, right? How you doing? I'm just living right by the eyes of the Lord today, Kyle. Like, that's not real. I've never had anyone say that. We don't use that kind of imagery anymore. I think a modern language version of what Judges talks about here would be saying, like, I'm living my truth. I'm living my way. I'm following my heart. I'm doing me. I'm doing my best. The reality is we can't live our truth if it's contrary to God's truth and not have it affect us. Because all truth is God's truth, we can't bend it to become mine. And so when it says Israel was doing evil in the eyes of the Lord or doing right in their own eyes, it should challenge us to examine ourselves. Whose eyes are we living right by? When we look at our lives, our actions, our habits, our vices, or our virtues, are they right in the eyes of the Lord? Or is it just right in our own eyes? The Israelites weren't living right according to the eyes of the Lord, and so we are told that the Lord gave them into the hands of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Now, the mention of Jabin, it's a really interesting way to frame this whole story and to set the scene for what's about to happen. Because Jabin led the battle against the Israelites that Joshua defeated in Joshua chapter 11, the previous book. You can go and read about that moment. So Jabin being mentioned here in Judges chapter 4, it means that Israel didn't fully obey God's instructions and didn't fully drive out their enemies like they were instructed to. If Israel had trusted God more fully earlier in their story, Jabin wouldn't have even been there. And so this whole story that starts by beginning, God's people are suffering. They're facing cruel oppression. It begins by saying the people they're suffering from shouldn't have even been there. They shouldn't have been in the land. But the previous generation's obedience was partial, which meant the Israelites' freedom was partial. They didn't fully obey, which meant they were facing some of the challenges because of that. So for us, if we want to be fully free in this world, we should practice full obedience to the God who so loves us. The Israelites were being really cruelly oppressed by Sisera, and that's a new way of describing. Normally throughout the story it says they're being oppressed, but now it's they are being cruelly oppressed. And we're told that Sisera, the face of the enemy, the symbolic head of the evil oppressors, had 900 chariots that were fitted with iron. And so history fans, this tells us this was right at the turn of the Iron Age, 1200 BC or so. And these iron chariots, they weren't just a sign or symbol of strength for them. It's telling us that the battle was one of entirely different classifications of warfare. The enemy had iron chariots. The Israelites had their Bronze Age swords. It's an entirely different class of war. Perhaps the best way to think of it in modern terms would be an army of soldiers showing up to a battlefield with their machine guns when several kilometers away there's a bunch of drones taking off. It's not even a close comparison. Sisera had new technology, highly advanced, specialized in pursuing the enemy and crushing them. And the Israelites were being oppressed. Later in Judges, we're told that it was so bad in the land that the Israelites were scared to even walk on the highways. They would hide in the shadows. They would hide from other people. The oppression was so heavy. The fear was so real. They didn't even want to be seen. And so they would navigate in secret hiding places. And yet, like we've already seen in the last couple of weeks, no matter where we may be, and no matter why we may be there, when God's people cry out, God responds. The Israelites were being oppressed because of some of their own doing, and yet when they cried out, God intervenes. We pick the story back up in verse 4. We read this. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. I noticed that Rozzy said, are there any Deborahs in the room and not any Lapidoths? But if you're a Lapidoth, I don't want you to feel overlooked here, okay? I'm glad you're here too. Deborah held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. So first thing, we're now introduced to the new judge on the scene. We're introduced to Deborah. And the first thing we're told about Deborah is that she's a prophet. She's a prophetess. She speaks and declares on behalf of God to the people out of her relationship with God. We're also told that she's a wife to Lapidoth. We're told that she's a judge, that she would render judgments, making decisions, calling out realities. She's judging the tensions and managing negotiations between people that were amidst strife, helping the complex conflicts of the land and finding a way through them on behalf of the people of Israel. We're also told that Deborah is a military strategist. While she didn't go and fight the war, she was the brainchild, the strategist behind the scenes and involved in it in that way. We also see that Deborah commissions Barak, and she says to him, hasn't God spoken to you to go? Isn't it your turn to go? Hasn't God called you, Barak? You need to go. It's time to go. It's also worth noting with Deborah and Barak lived really close to the enemy lines. Where they were having to go to battle, Barak lived right there. Deborah was 27 kilometers south of that. She was nowhere near the battle lines, but Deborah had to call someone close to the war while she was far away from it to go and engage in it. And we learn a lot from Deborah about seeing the horizon, seeing the challenges in the future. One last highlight we learn from Deborah is not only is she the first female leader of the nation of Israel, but she's also the first person described to be a leader based on her moral character. Up until this point, the leaders were just the violent ones, the warriors, the ones who would win the battle. But here, Deborah is described to lead and to judge out of the character that she had. No longer is a judge just the warrior. The judge is now a person of integrity. And so I just want to take a moment here to address the reality of Deborah and what it means for us. In Judges chapter 5, we can read a prophetic poem that Deborah wrote with Barak. And in that poem, Deborah says these words, "I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel." So Deborah was also a mother in Israel. And what we learn about her speaks so much to the vocation of motherhood, speaks so much to the power of womanhood. Like, we don't know if Deborah had children with Lapidoth or not, but what we do know is she arose as a mother in the land. And so while speaking of Deborah and highlighting who Deborah was, I just want to quickly address and speak to the women and the mothers in the room, those who can arise as a mother in Calgary or wherever you may be from. And I just want to say thank you. You are doing holy work. There is so much to learn and so much to embody from Deborah's life and leadership. Imagine the power and the potential of the woman in our community following in Deborah's footsteps, living in intimacy with God, caring for the people in the orbit of your influence, caring as spiritual mothers for those around you, and then calling out and commissioning the people around you, just like she saw what was going on in Barak's story. Imagine the power of the women in this community, seeing what God is doing in the people around you and saying, God has called you to this. God has called you to this. And to recognize some of the challenges in the horizon and saying, that's okay, God is with us. So to all the mothers and to those who can arise as a mother, to bless and care for and lead those in your orbit, you are indeed doing holy work. And thank you. Deborah, the one in relationship with God, the prophet, the judge, the leader. When she summons and commissions Barak, we read these words, verse 8. She commissions Barak, and then Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Certainly, I'll go with you, said Deborah. But because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours. For the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Verse 14, then Deborah said to Barak, go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down to Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. And then verse 17 summarizes it again. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael. When we read through these stories swiftly in one block chunk, we can miss some of the important details that the author wants us to recognize. It's a good rule of thumb that whenever we slow down to read and engage with the scriptures and allow them to come alive before us, the more the nuances of it will jump out to us. Did anybody catch the irony that the author wants us to recognize in how he talks about the chariots? What was at the beginning the place of power, the symbol of their strength, became the place of embarrassment for Sisera. Did you notice that? At the beginning, the chariots, the beacon of security, strength, iron, power, oppression, cruelty, different class of warfare. And then in verse 17 and in verse 15, two different times we're told Sisera had to climb out of his chariot and had to run away on foot. What used to chase people down, he had to run away from because it became a liability for him. In the next chapter, Judges chapter 5, we're told God sent water to the place of the battle, whether it was rain or a river or rain that caused a river to flood the plains. All of a sudden there was all this mud. And you want to know what renders a chariot useless? Mud. And so what Sisera relied on for his strength and power, what Israel was terrified of, God rendered absolutely useless in a moment. The Israelites were scared, hiding, running because of the chariots. And then God, like that, makes them nothing more than stuck chariots in the mud. God makes a mockery of the chariots that Sisera relied on. And church, God can still make a mockery of the chariots of this age. The things that might scare us, the things that cause us to want to hide, the things that are intimidating, the things that bring fear into our lives, God can render useless like that. He can immobilize them. God still delivers his people. Through the eyes of the Israelites, the chariots were terrifying. Through the eyes of the Lord, they were lawn decorations. And there are things in our lives that are scary. There are things in our lives that can be really intimidating when we look at them through our eyes. But whatever those might be for you, I invite you to view them through the eyes of the Lord today. To call out to him and to see, how does he view the challenge you're looking at? May we not bow and run from the chariots of the day, because God can turn them into lawn decorations. The story continues on in what is undoubtedly one of the most gruesome moments in the scriptures. We're going to read a little bit more about Jael. And Jael means wild mountain goat. And let me tell you, she is going to live up to her name. Verse 18, while Sisera is running on foot, we're told, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid." So he entered her tent and she covered him with a blanket. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. So in case you were wondering, yes, a cranium piercing through the head into the ground did cause him to, in fact, die. Verse 22, just then Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera. Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I'll show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead still. In case you were wondering, he is still dead, all dead. Verse 23, on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. Here we're more personally introduced to Jael and to Sisera. But Sisera, throughout this whole story, from the beginning through here, is the symbolic and the practical face of oppression, the face of the evil oppressor. He's kind of the face of evil for God's people. And what Judges is showing us here is with their disobedience, the enemy was in their land. But not only was the enemy in their land, the enemy wanted to enter their tent. In fact, Deborah is unique in that most of the other conflicts that we read about up until now and in the story of God's people, the enemy are always outside, different lands, different countries. But here with Deborah, the enemy is inside. It's right within their borders. It's around them. But that's not enough for Sisera, the face of the oppressor. Sisera wanted to enter right into the tent. And what we see Jael doing when the oppressor, the face of the enemy of God's people, enters her tent is pretty gruesome. But I just want to acknowledge that Sisera comes in, seeks comfort, seeks to be at home, seeks to relax, to rest, to dwell with Jael, and that's exactly what sin still wants to do in our lives. Not just be around us, but to enter in, to rest and relax and to dwell within our tents and our homes and our hearts. When we read through this story, there's no mention of God in it. And some scholars like to make a big deal of that, saying God's not mentioned here because God is explicitly disapproving of what goes on here. However, Judges chapter 5 attributes the victory pretty strongly, pretty clearly to God, the sovereign one. I mean, obviously the scriptures do not condone murder. Like Jael in one moment broke 20% of the 10 commandments in one swift move, lying and murder, if you're wondering. And yet we still see this story here. At the very, 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 very least, what this shows us is God's capacity for taking broken people and incorporating even broken actions into his mysterious plan and purposes for saving people. Jael, when evil and sin, representative in Sisera, entered her tent, what she did is she grabbed what was around her. She grabbed what was within reach for her. In those days, one of the household chores for women was the setting up and the taking down of the tent. While the men would go and hunt or make sure that the enemies were far enough away, the women would set up and take down the tent. And I just wonder, how many times had Jael grabbed the tent peg and the hammer and just set up the tent? How many times throughout her life had she done that? How many times had she done it with joy? How many times she's like, this is so annoying. Why do we keep moving tent? How many times had she done that very motion, that very action? How familiar, how much muscle memory was there for her with that motion? But what we see here was that her chore was her preparation for deliverance. And there are all kinds of things we all have the opportunity to do every day that might be super annoying or frustrating. That can also be preparation for deliverance. I saw one person while preaching on this was talking about the boy who had the fish and the loaves and how his mom probably packed that lunch 100 times for him. But on this one day, when that lunch was packed for him, it was the provision for thousands of people. Doing the faithful things behind the scenes well can be preparation for what God wants to do in our lives. Everything that we practice, that we do each day, God can use to do mighty and wonderful things. Ultimately, what we see with Jael is her desperation and her desire to destroy the oppressor, to destroy the cruelty and the destruction of sin. John Owen famously said a long, long time ago, be killing sin or sin will be killing you. And we see Jael's radical commitment to killing sin, to join in on what God was doing that would result in the freeing of God's people by grabbing what was around her, by doing what she had done so many times before. Before I end, I'd like to just go on a bit of a geek out of some biblical scholarship with you for a moment. Is that okay? I think it's worth it. It's a little bit of a scenic route of biblical scholarship and Judges. There's 2 steps to it. The first one is this. This story of Jael and Barak and Sisera and Deborah, it's the only story that actually appears twice in the book of Judges. Judges chapter 4, we're told the story. Judges chapter 5, the story is told to us in poetry form. People say there's prose and there's poetry here. And Judges chapter 5 is Deborah's prophetic poem illustrating what had gone on in chapter 4. But why I say this and why I highlight that difference between Judges 4 and Judges 5 is that most scholars think Judges chapter 5, the prophetic poem of Deborah, is the oldest, one of the oldest texts that we have of the entire Bible, dating to the 12th century BC. Okay, so Judges 5, the oldest, one of the oldest pieces of surviving text was the poem of Deborah, which meant in their culture, as they passed things from generation to generation to generation, the prophetic poem of Deborah would have formed and informed the entire theological framework for how God would deliver and save his people. Okay, so Judges 5, the poem, it would have been passed down, sung around campfires. It would have been like their version of like Old MacDonald and helping shape the children's imagination of how songs would work. And it framed their theological framework, stemming with the prophet Deborah. Israel's worship, their theology was all downstream, all predicated upon Judges chapter 5. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, I love to do word studies in my preaching preparation. And this week, out of curiosity, I looked up every instance of tent peg showing up in the Bible. It shows up more than I would have thought. The words tent peg shows up 11 times in the Bible. 11 times. Out of those 11, 7 of them are in reference to the tabernacle. The tent pegs being used to set up and take down the tabernacle as they were migrating about. And God would give them instructions on the tent peg with the tabernacle. That's 7 of the 11. 3 of them are in Judges chapter 4 and Judges chapter 5 that we've looked at so far. But there's one other time tent peg is mentioned. And it's in Zechariah chapter 10, verse 4. And this is what it says. From Judah will come the cornerstone. From him, the tent peg. From him, the battle bow. From him, every ruler. Now, I'm sure you caught tent peg. Zechariah was a prophet in the tradition of Deborah, prophesying downstream of her ministry and her leadership. 700 years after Deborah, Zechariah would show up on the scene talking about the Messiah. And he's saying, the Messiah is coming from the people of Judah. The Messiah will be the cornerstone, holding this all together. The Messiah will be the tent peg. The Messiah will be from every ruler, and goes on and gives this prophetic promise about what the Messiah would do. And there's 2 things that we have seen tent pegs do in the Old Testament before Zechariah. The first one is the tent peg was used to hold down and secure the presence of God on earth. To hold the tabernacle in place so that whatever storm would come, it would be held down. God's presence was secure and the whole nation would surround it. But the tabernacle was secure. Why? Because the tent pegs were holding it down. So God's presence was secure in the center of his people. And the second thing we see tent pegs doing in the Old Testament is destroying sin, crushing sin. The sin in the surrounding neighborhoods and the sin that enters into our very lives. And Zechariah is saying, when the Messiah comes, he will hold down the presence of God on earth in a way that is stable and secure and can withstand any storm. And when the Messiah comes, he will be the tent peg that destroys the sin around us and destroys the sin within us. God will send a tent peg to deliver his people again and to secure his presence on earth forever. God will drive a tent peg into the oppression and cruelty of this world. So here's what we need to know. God never gives up on his people. And God has sent a tent peg in the person of Jesus. All that Jael had to do when she was facing Sisera was just to reach out to what was at hand. Just reach out and take advantage of what was right there. And friends, for us to experience the freedom of God's deliverance, all we have to do is to reach out and to take hold of the one who is here with us. The one who's enthroned on our praises, and to reach out and say, Jesus, I need you. I need you. Tent peg, I've taken hold of you. While Deborah was leading, they were living and dealing with the disobedience of the generations that had gone on before them. And even though God's people had strayed for the third time in 4 chapters, even though they weren't living right in the eyes of the Lord, they were living right in their own eyes, even though they were being consumed by their passions and the swirling in the cycle of sin, God doesn't give up on them. And God rescued them in an unexpected way with Jael and a tent peg. And it may feel for you today that you are living and experiencing oppression and difficulty and hardship because of the disobedience of somebody else. God can still deliver you. He can still deliver you. You might be feeling like, I've been living right by my own eyes for a real long time. God can still deliver you. The fear, the oppression, the cruelty might be so heavy for you that you're like, I'm hiding. I know I'm hiding. Like, I'll still drive on the roads unlike the Israelites, but I'm hiding in every other way in my life. God still sees you, friend. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to hide anymore. You may be staring straight at hundreds of chariots that are pursuing you to crush you. God can turn those chariots into lawn decorations. Reach out, take hold of the one who has reached out and taken hold of you today. God still responds when his people cry out. There is still freedom from oppression and cruelty. There is still freedom from disobedience. There is still freedom from sin. Let the sin be killed today before it kills you. How? What does God ask of us? Like Jael, just take hold of what's in reach. And friends, Jesus is within reach today. The King is in the room. Take hold of him today. He is the tent peg that brings us to safety and freedom and deliverance. And we take hold of him not by living wisely by our own eyes. We take hold of him by his power, by his grace, by his truth, by his love. He is the tent peg that brings freedom. Oh friend, reach out to him today. Amen.